everyone. Welcome. We're going to get started in like 2 minutes. So if you want to come in and grab that last bit of coffee and your seat, you can keep chatting as you walk. Really quiet room. I appreciate that. So we're going to bring the candidates up to the stage if I see you, and we're going to bring them down from upstairs, and we'll get started in just 2 minutes. So come on in and grab a seat.
This one on. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Stephanie Birmingham, she, her pronouns, Director of Community and Operations at New York City Employment and Training Coalition. We're going to be using Slido today for your questions. If you're tuning in on YouTube Live, you also have the Slido link in the description for the live video. You can submit your questions on slido.com using code MAYOR or scan the QR code you see on the screen to submit questions throughout the program. Thank you so much. We'll get started in a moment.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Thank you all so much for joining us here for a really important conversation. I'm Michelle Jackson. I'm the Executive Director of the Human Services Council. Thanks. I love our nonprofit community. I really appreciate everyone making time on a really short notice, and I really have to thank the candidates for agreeing to do this really important conversation today. As you know, because you're in this room as nonprofit organizations, HSC and all of our partner organizations, including the incredible partner in this New York City Employment Training Coalition, we are 501c3s. So we do not make endorsements. So don't do that if you're thinking about it. We don't do endorsements, but we can engage the candidates on really important issues to our communities. And now more than ever, it's really important that New York City and the nonprofit sector engage in the political process and make sure that nonprofits are known as the economic engine that they are and the important workforce in the community. This is something that you all know, and luckily the candidates know as well. The nonprofit sector in New York is the largest private employer in New York State, not just in New York City. We run $6 billion worth of contracts through New York City government, and through those contracts, New York City employs 125,000 human services workers through those contracts, which means the workforce of the human services sector is probably triple that overall. So we're a huge economic engine. We solve the most pressing issues that are facing our communities, and the people who do that work on the ground are the second lowest paid workforce in New York City, just ahead of restaurant workers. You'll get a sense of the questions today. They're overwhelmingly women and women of color who do this job, and they're on the front line, and they don't get the credit for the work that they do every day. And so HSC, along with all of our partners, have taken on the Just Pay campaign. We take on procurement and contracting issues that really stymie your ability to get the job done every day. And we talk about really important programs that do solve some of our most pressing affordability questions, like workforce development, childcare, housing, eviction prevention. You know, the list is endless. I won't go through it all. You all know what you do. And so we're just really grateful for you to be here to represent the nonprofit sector and for the candidates for agreeing to this important conversation, especially so early in the season, so that they understand and that the campaigns really do embrace the fact that as we talk about these tough issues that we're probably going to face more in January than we have before, that there's, this is a partnership and should be a partnership between New York City and the nonprofit sector, and it doesn't always feel that way. So that's the work that we do here today and the work that HSC does on a daily basis. And with that, Slido, if you open the app, a little technical stuff, we had to change the QR code, so please do that again. We'll take some questions at the end, if we have time. Senator Ramos is running a little bit late. She will be here. We'll put her on stage, and really appreciate the candidates all being here today. We ask you to hold applause, be respectful. We have a lot of content to get through today, so use Slido to ask questions or make comments, and we'll try to get to as much audience engagement through that app as possible. And with that, I will turn it over. We're really grateful to Katie Honan from the city, who has agreed to moderate this important discussion today, so I will turn it over to her.
Thank you and good morning, everybody. You can hear, welcome everyone here to the Mayoral Candidate Forum, and special thanks to the Human Services Council of New York and the New York City Employment Training Coalition for organizing this in this beautiful space. So as Michelle said, there's an opportunity to ask questions, pay attention to what everyone's answers are while you're formulating your questions, and to the candidates, you can introduce yourselves in a little bit, but the people here in this room, obviously, they are on the ground and they know these issues very, very intimately. So be as specific as possible. Once you're elected, you can go back to being vague and cagey, but but for now, you have to be very, very specific. Sorry, okay, that actually went over better than I thought, so I appreciate that. So if you do want to just quickly introduce yourselves, I know Jessica Ramos is on her way, and you have to leave. There's a hard out, so if you have to dip out, he already had a planned thing. So just if you see him leaving, he's not running away. Go down.
Okay. Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Morning.
Good morning.
That's what I'm talking about. I'm State Senator Zelnor Myrie. Very proud to be here with the fellow candidates and to be with all of you. I would not be sitting here. I would not be a state senator. I would not have gone to law school if not for an after-school program. And my story is not unique. There are so many New Yorkers so many vulnerable New Yorkers that count on all of you, that count on this sector in order to survive. And that is why I think it's really important, and I'm excited to be here at the top of the campaign season for us to center the needs of this particular sector. We have to do better as a city, and I'm looking forward to getting into the details as we continue. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Zohran Mamdani. I'm a state assembly member representing Astoria and Long Island City. And about 6 years ago, I was sitting in an office in Jackson Heights picking up phone calls from low-income homeowners of color across Queens who were facing eviction from their homes. And I was working at that time as a foreclosure prevention housing counselor at Chaya CDC. And oftentimes, I was the only thing that separated these New Yorkers from the prospect of being out on the street. And if you were a New Yorker who only spoke Hindi or Urdu, I was the only person in the entire state of New York who was working at a HUD-licensed organization that could help you. And for that, I was paid $47,000 a year. And that is an illustration of much of nonprofit work across the city, critically important and yet simultaneously undervalued. While you have been keeping New Yorkers in their homes, in their jobs, in their lives, in return you have a city that owes you about $800 million. At my time in the Assembly, I have tried to fix that imbalance, serving as the co-chair of the Asian Pacific American Task Force, securing $90 million in historic funding for nonprofits across the state. I now sit before you as a candidate for mayor with a clear belief that the city has to and must do better by nonprofits, not only in terms of fixing the very clear procurement issues, but also by instituting new late payment fees on the city itself if it does not do so, by ensuring that we actually cover the entire cost of service in a contract, not 80% of it, and by finally understanding that your work is critical to this city continuing to be what it is. It's time that we actually do that and make those investments. I'm excited to speak about that today.
Thank you, Katie and Michelle and HSC and New York City Employment and Training Coalition and everyone in the room. If you're here, it's almost certainly because you're part of an organization that takes care of kids or seniors or helps people get good jobs or helps homeless people find housing, like the most important work in the city. I'm also proud to have been part of that work for a long time, for half my career in affordable housing and workforce development. Some of the things I'm proudest of are with folks in the room. And my wife, Meg Barnett, is here, who spent her whole career in the sector helping build reproductive health services at Planned Parenthood, and until last month, leading nonprofit New York. Thank you, Meg. So we all really value that work. I think you know that. But it doesn't feel like that from city officials so often. It feels like it's an extra, or like you should be grateful for the crumbs you get from city government, even when we contract for that work. And that is not how I see it. To me, there's two parts of the essential service program that New York City is working to provide. We've got our municipal workers, our teachers and sanitation workers and public hospital nurses and cops and firefighters doing essential work. And we have contracted human service providers doing childcare and homeless services and protecting domestic violence survivors and on, just as essential. But imagine this. What if in January we sent a memo to our schools and precincts and firehouses saying, hey, please keep doing the work starting January 1st. Maybe we'll pay you by the end of the year, maybe. Salaries now start at the minimum wage and there'll be no guarantee of cost of living adjustments. No more pensions. For the rent, please write grants to philanthropy and hopefully they'll cover the rent for you. And by the way, we know better how to fight the fires and pick up the trash anyway, so we'll write requests for proposals without consulting you. That would not get the trash picked up or fight fires or keep our neighborhood safe. And it also is not a good way to provide childcare or affordable housing or domestic violence services. So I can't promise that as mayor I will make every one of those things equal, but what I can promise you is that you'll have someone at City Hall that sees you as an essential partner, that respects the work deeply, and that will fix many of the problems we're focused on today because I get them from the ground up. Thank you.
Scott Stringer, former city controller, former borough president, former state assemblyman, dad to Max and Miles, lifelong New Yorker, and it's great to be here with all of you. And look, I just want to cut to the chase. We got here in a crazy way. The notion that city government delivers essential services or human services is actually fundamentally not true. We contract out to all of you to take care of our children, to take care of our seniors, to make sure that the most vulnerable New Yorkers have a fighting chance. And the way government rewards nonprofit organizations is by strangling these organizations. And the smaller you are, the most vulnerable you are to the whims of something that is so important, but just not understood, is this role of procurement, which determines the services that you're able to provide. As city controller, I exposed the procurement scandal in city government. And for 5 years, worked with all of you to get City Hall to understand that if we don't reform the system, we're going to break the system. So my pledge to you as the next mayor, potentially, is to upend this system. The status quo is not working. And I think we all are aligned on that. But I will say to you today, and I hope at the end of the debate I can show you, that my history, my skills on this issue give you a real opportunity to work with City Hall and work with the next controller to finish what we started way back many years ago, which is finally aligning city government with the important work of not-for-profits. Thank you.
We were just doing brief introductions, so the State Senator, if you want to just introduce yourself very briefly, and we'll get into
Sure.
questions.
Thank you, Katie. I just got to reprise my old commute from Jackson Heights to this area when I used to work at a mighty, mighty union, Local 371, the City Social Service Workers Union, which is where I started my labor career. And quite frankly, I'm very thankful to all of the organizations that are hosting this forum this morning, because I cannot tell you how many contractors I talk to across the city who are really worried about getting paid. And as it is, we know that the human services sector is underpaid, but it's even worse when you're not paid on time. And I did get to walk in and hear some thoughts from my colleagues on procurement. There's plenty to say about the passport process, even though Vendex is what was used when I was at City Hall. And I think that overall, and I know we're going to cover this in a lot of different ways throughout the forum, we want to make sure that RFPs are happening earlier. Contracted services should know if they're going to get renewed a lot earlier. There should be people at different city agencies who are actually thinking through this process and helping our organizations get to where they need to go. Because where the city is right now, we just can't afford for there to be a lapse in services. The added value of our human services sector is so great, especially considering the condition of our economy, that we have to be willing to work together in order to reform the system and make sure we are delivering for New Yorkers. And I'm here to fight like a mother for every New Yorker. Thank you.
Thank you. So again, just a quick housekeeping thing. Be specific, but don't go on too long. Don't interrupt each other. This is a nonprofit run thing. We'll be polite, so you don't have to, you can fight in another forum. So our first question, as many of you kind of laid out, is just how vital the nonprofit human services are to support New Yorkers across the city, from COVID testing and vaccines, setting up food pantries, creating emergency housing, or addressing everyday family emergencies. The sector supports neighbors and clients, but as everyone in here knows, there's poor coordination with the city, delayed payments, and low wages that often hinder the ability to recruit and retain staff. Those are significant barriers to delivering the programs that they provide. So as mayor, what are the first two things you and your administration would do differently to build a true working relationship with your human service partners? I guess we'll just start here and we'll kind of go back and forth.
Great, and thank you for the question. So it has come up already, some of the administrative hurdles that you face. I think there has to be a culture of accountability with MOCs. If you do not deliver payment in a timely fashion, there should be consequences for that. And I think that that would help deal with the crisis that we're in. 90% of the city payments are late to this sector. We have close to 20% that are technically insolvent because of this lack of timely payment. So I think there needs to be a culture of accountability and consequences when they don't meet that. But for the folks who are struggling right now, there are outstanding payments of close to $400 million in this city. People have taken out loans in this sector to the tune of $90 million with interest that is at $6 million. That is just unbearable. So I think that what we do on the returnable payment fund, I think that needs to be expanded. I think that access needs to grow and that it needs to be quicker.
You know, I've mentioned a few things in the opening statement, so I'm going to use this opportunity to say two other ones. One of them is the necessity of giving more money up front. This is something that is critically important as we work to fix all of the procurement issues and ensuring the entirety of service costs is actually paid for by the city. We have to give nonprofits enough flexibility at the beginning of that contract to actually survive through it. The second thing I would say is we have to end the culture of silos within city government when it comes to nonprofits. There is not enough clarity as to who owns what and who is actually responsible for what is unacceptable and what is continuing to go on right now. What we need to do is make it very clear where that responsibility lies so that we're not in a situation like we're in the one today where nonprofit legal providers are in month 5 of a contract with the city providing services for some of the most lauded legislation we have in New York City, from right to counsel to making sure we have an immigration opportunity initiative, and yet they have yet to receive any money in that contract because the city hasn't even approved it for fiscal year 25. That's unacceptable, and those are two things I would do to change it.
So I'm not waiting till I get to the mayor's office to confront the timely payment crisis. As soon as I was elected controller, before I even took office, I said, let's get busy. We put forward the idea to make discretionary contracts multi-year, so those of you that now have contracts that don't have to be re-registered and you're getting payments on, that was something that we did. And then what we did, and the reason that task force with the mayor broke down, is that we insisted on creating a transparent contract stats system so you could see what every agency is up to, and when they refused to do it, we ended that task force. So number one is, in last, the city revision, the Charter Revision Commission last year, my office proposed that we amend the charter to give every single agency and oversight agency deadlines. We've got deadlines on contract registration, 30 days. Our average is 17, and we have gotten every single one of the 60,000 contracts we receive registered or returned to the agency in that deadline, every single one. The mayor's office just put out proposals for timelines that would take from 325 to 510 days. It is outrageous. So in the coming Charter Revision Commission, when I've got a seat on the commission, I will propose legislation that mandates deadlines for every agency and every oversight agency. As mayor, I will live up to them with consequences if they don't happen. And we'll make sure everybody gets paid on time. We'll also do legislation to address the prevailing wage and fix that so that you can count on COLAs and you can count on adequate wages for your workforce.
So I'm sitting in the controller's office one day, and I have a meeting with a very important nonprofit group, and they tell us it's an emergency meeting. They come into the office, they sit down, and they really look panicked. And they say to me straight up, if you don't approve this contract within 48 hours, we're going under financially. And I was like, whoa, what did we do, or what didn't we do? Of course, I ring the bell. It's an emergency. We go to the contracting unit. I said, find this contract and approve it before they go under. Hour later, we don't have the contract. I said, I'm meeting with a not-for-profit group that says we have the contract. He said, Scott, we don't have the contract. To make a long story short, none of these contracts during the de Blasio years were coming in a timely way to the controller's office. In fact, it was taking months and months for the procurement side of City Hall to even ready the contract, both in terms of looking at integrity, due diligence, and the like. We then went into investigation mode. And that's when we exposed, way back, I think, in 2018, that 90% of these contracts were late. The staffing situation was not adequate within the agencies. And this quickly became a mayoral issue, less a controller's issue. Now, I know strides have been made since I left, but we are slow walking this, people. We have got to go in right now, do an analysis of every agency's procurement capacity, and hire appropriately. The staffing in the agencies cannot put the contracts forward. And that is one root of concern that I have. That has to change on January 1st. Lastly, I just want to also mention that we do have to work with all of you to do a better job at the beginning of the process. I agree with Zoran that there is a lot of pre-work that has to go on in order to get those contracts, because what's at stake is the collapse of many of our not-for-profit groups. And I think that is something we have to focus on. I started this in 2018, met with all of you, exposed what was happening within City Hall. It was an outrage then. Quite frankly, nothing has happened positive since the Adams administration took over. In fact, some people tell me it's gotten a lot worse.
Well, prior to 2018, over at City Hall where I was, actually many of the folks in this room helped comprise the Nonprofit Resiliency Committee. And I want to commend those of you who participated in our efforts at City Hall to be able to address the inequities that we were already seeing and that we had inherited from the previous mayor. The reality is that the late payment of contracts is a tale as old as New York City. And it is heartening to see that you have candidates before you who are willing to address this issue. But I do think that this, like everything else in the city, requires a community review process. And I would love to be able to count on each and every one of you to comprise a Nonprofit Resiliency Committee once again, and really be able to redesign Passport and other processes with you guys and your input and your ideas in mind. That being said, when contracts are paid late, then the city should pay a low interest rate to you. Because the fact of the matter is that in that delay, there has been an increase in costs that have taken place. Inflation could have risen during that time because it's taken so long. And you're a different type of contractor than other contractors in the city. I know a lot about construction because I worked at the building trades for some time. And in construction, you know, there's something called a Wicks law that forces the city to take the lowest bidder. And over time, if a project is delayed, the architects, the contractors, the developers get to submit change orders that increase the price of the project. But you are not afforded that same luxury. And so the reality is that over time, sometimes, especially in New York City, things get more expensive. And even if it's a low rate, I think we have to account for that when we are paying contracts late. But it all begins with making sure that RFPs are coming out a lot earlier, and that there are dedicated people at every single city agency, not just MOCs. MOCs should be overseeing the process, and really making sure that we're putting forth a system that addresses all of the inequities we've seen during our entire lifetimes here in New York City.
Thank you. This next question is about wage equity. The True Cost of Living report reveals that over 3 times as many New York City households struggle to meet basic needs than the official poverty measure indicates. The Just Pay campaign has highlighted how human services workers, professionals in child welfare, mental health, and housing, they earn less than a living wage despite their critical roles in supporting these households. So how will your administration ensure that the workers receive fair wages that reflect the value of their contributions while safeguarding their ability to sustain themselves and move beyond meeting basic needs so they can have the ability to plan for the future? So this is about just wage. I guess we'll start with Senator Ramos, so we're not on.
Appropriate. Labor chair hat on. Well, look, I mean, I am a big believer in wage parity, in wage transparency. In fact, I wrote the state's salary transparency law to make sure that jobs and job postings actually include the salary ranges there's a lot still to tinker with and make sure that there's the appropriate enforcement from DOL, which is a grossly underfunded and understaffed agency because we're victims of austerity budgets. But at the same time, we want to make sure that every single person that's doing work for the city of New York is being compensated in a way that allows them to make a living in the city of New York, to be able to actually save for a rainy day. This is why I'm the senator who just raised the minimum wage and passed a bill that also indexes it to inflation. So not only did we get a raise to the minimum wage last year, we're getting one in January thanks to my bill, and we're going to be getting one every January from here on out because of the work that we've been able to do in the New York State Senate. And I think that we have really allowed the contracting out of services to really have to compete with the likes of DC 37, despite being counting on licensed social service workers. And that really shouldn't be. We have to make sure that your wages are able to keep up with a lot of the contract bonuses and a lot of the negotiations that take place with the Municipal Labor Committee, so that we're able to ensure that people are getting their services. Look, I think if anything, the reason I want to be your mayor in New York City is because I understand what it's like to be working class in New York City, I think more than anybody on this stage, and because I've seen how social service workers are traditionally undervalued and underpaid, despite having student loans, despite having mortgages and rent bills. And traditionally, we have not allowed this sector to really be able to have the tools to answer the crises before us, whether it's substance abuse counselors, those helping foster children, or those helping our seniors and everybody in between. So I'm really hoping that as your mayor, I won't only be able to negotiate cost of living increases and contracts with union and non-union workers, but again, and I think it's relevant here, people need to get paid on time because the landlord wants their rent on time.
Well, kudos to Jessica and the legislators on stage for fighting these important budget fights, and I really mean it. It's made a difference. But look, going forward, there's a couple of issues that we have to fix. The first is there is this weird presumption that if you're in a not-for-profit or any philanthropic organization, staffing is last, right? A big donor doesn't want to come in and pay staff. They want the big statue, or they want the big impression. But staffing has always been, well, don't pay too much. We're afraid to raise the salary of a qualified staffer. Oh my God, if we give a promotion, suddenly the newspapers are going to say we're milking the system. And the mayor, multiple mayors, have allowed that perception to fester. If you look at this last budget, which was unbelievable, we had a mayor who used the power of his office to falsely talk about a budget deficit that didn't even exist. And the first thing he talked about was basically getting rid of the employees within city government, which trickled over to our nonprofit community. So the first thing a mayor has to commit to is making sure that we value the human experience that delivers services, not the trucks, not the lunches, not all the other things, but basic attracting human talent, upskilling our workforce is the way we're going to protect our kids and our seniors and all the good work you do. But that doesn't happen both with nonprofits and philanthropy, and quite frankly, the city never wants to admit to paying anyone $1 more because they think it is politically a problem, and I think that has to change fundamentally.
We did a deep dive in the Controller's Office on the care workforce, which is online, and I encourage you to take a look at it. It's where a lot of the job growth has been since COVID in childcare and home care. But as you pointed out, it's some of the lowest paid work. It's overwhelmingly women of color. When there have been improvements, it's come from public policies, things like the minimum wage increase, the steps toward pay parity in daycare. and similar in home care, but we're woefully behind. So step one for the city is fixing the living wage law. That's a law that says when the city is paying for work, it needs to be above minimum wage. Except now it's stuck 10 years ago and it's below the minimum wage. The living wage law sets the living wage not anywhere near the true cost of living, but below the minimum wage. So that has to be fixed and it has to be brought back above the minimum wage. Then it's got to be indexed to inflation every year, has to include a COLA in the law, and it needs to make sure that that isn't just for the lowest paid workers. Once that's legislated, then the city's budget process needs to be responsive to it, and that is how we can make sure that we aren't paying people minimum wage and that people are seeing increases every year, just like municipal service employees do. Then last night, a number of us were with James Parrott at his retirement from the New School. He did all this work on what it would look like for the nonprofit human service sector to have career ladders and for the city to be a partner in thinking about how we actually help invest in professional development so folks can grow, get that next degree, in childcare, in early childhood education, and move up the ladder, again, as we do in civil service and as we should be partners when we're contracting for social service work. And then finally, one of the things that Meg was working on at Nonprofit New York, and I know some of you are paying attention to, is a multi-employer pension program. So that if you're in a small nonprofit organization, you would have some resources to be able to invest in the retirement security of your staff, and the city should be a partner in that as well.
Well, first, I just want to congratulate everyone in this room for having gotten Eric Adams to do one good thing, which is no small feat. And what I say that in reference to is speaking about the COLA increases from City Hall with regards to nonprofit workers. And that is a similar fight that was being waged at the state level. And the demand was 3.2, the result was 2.8. And so we've both seen the successes of these fights for COLAs and the limitations of COLAs in and of themselves and the necessity of more than that. And so I think at the state level, one thing that's of immense interest is thinking about a wage board to figure out what are the ways that we can.
That's my bill. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you so much.
I'm here to talk about everything I agree with.
We got you a co-sponsor.
Thank you, right here. And I think that's incredibly important. And I think also when we're talking about nonprofit workers, we have to remember that some recent studies have shown that about 20% of nonprofit workers are enrolled into SNAP. This is an entire workforce that is being paid such poverty wages. And I think about a video I saw from this very organization highlighting a story of a woman by the name of Marlena and how she was the lifeline for so many New Yorkers. And at the end of her day, she had to take an hour-long commute of 2 buses. And so I think there's 2 things here. One is, how are you going to help nonprofit workers in their job? Help them to ensure there is closer to wage parity, that we're looking at that, so we're actually recognizing the innate value of this work. The other thing is, how are you going to help nonprofit workers outside of their job? Because so many of these other costs are also coming on top of all of the other difficulties of being a nonprofit worker. And so as part of my campaign, one of the proposals we've put forward is to make buses fast and to make them free. That would radically transform the experience of someone like Marlena in getting home, where she wouldn't have to be in the transportation desert that she was in. She wouldn't have to be waiting so long for these kinds of buses, and they wouldn't be stuck in the traffic that is currently stifling them to an average speed of 8 miles an hour, which is what a nonprofit worker is walking at the speed of when they're late to an appointment. That's what we're looking at right now. And then I think in addition to that, we have to think about rent. We have to think about childcare. These are the largest expenses, starting with housing for New Yorkers. And so one of our proposals is to freeze the rent for every rent-stabilized tenant throughout New York City. That would be about 2.5 million New Yorkers who can finally go back to what rent-stabilized units were, which is a bedrock of economic security. And the second is to make universal childcare a reality for every New Yorker, whether their child is 6 weeks or 5 years of age. These are things that can take the pressures off of nonprofit workers out of their job.
So my mom went to college late in life, in her late 30s, and her first job after getting that degree was at Services for the Underserved. And she made a little under $30,000 in her 40s in a rent-stabilized apartment in central Brooklyn. And this, to me, is one of the greatest tragedies of the work. because she was doing life-saving work every single day, and we were still struggling to get by. Now, it is true that 2/3 of human service workers make the near poverty wage here in the city, but it's not everyone that's not getting paid. If you've given a campaign contribution, then you get contracts. We've seen that in this administration. We have a culture of pay to play. And I have been proud to sponsor a bill in the state Senate that has passed 3 years in a row to end pay to play. That say if you give campaign contributions, you cannot get an RFP. That cannot be the culture that this government engenders. So I think we need, first, a government of integrity, and that says that we are going to hold up faith in our government so that the people doing the hardest work get our public tax dollars. But I also think it's important, as you have heard here today, that we put our money where our mouth is. This is a budgetary question. Do we value the work that you do, or do we not? We have put forward a plan for after school for all, universal after school in this city. But we cannot do that if our after school providers are serving our children during those hours, and then off hours are on the line to get public benefits. That is a disgrace. And so we need to not only have universal after school, but ensure that those providers are paid what they should be paid. And we have a bill that passed in the state Senate and in the Assembly this past legislative session that will mandate the Office of Children and Family Services to tell us how much our providers should be making so that it can make universal after school a reality.
Thank you. And just for just so everyone gets to ask first, and then have Scott, and then you kind of move along the line. I'm interested in fairness in this. And this question is about workforce training. How will your administration prioritize investments in workforce development to prepare professionals for future demands while also ensuring accessibility and equity?
Katie, it's a great question and very important. Look, there's workforce. The workforce is changing, and the challenge of workforce development is also changing. And the good news, to me, is that given the new jobs in tech or in a whole host of other disciplines, you don't necessarily need a 4-year college degree or even a 2-year college degree. What you need are the certificates that give you that knowledge base, that upskill the workforce, so that we can get people immediately into good paying jobs. Some of these jobs can realize $50,000, $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 a year if we capture the people who are raising children or who don't have a lot of time to go to traditional schools but can get that certificate. Look, imagine if we worked with the CUNY system, and this was my proposal, to make community college free, but also start targeting this kind of development, this kind of workforce development. And that is how we build skills for today's workforce. And let's face it, the workforce is changing. We need to get people not just to languish in minimum wage jobs, but we need to make sure that they have the skill sets so they can challenge in any other places. We don't need necessarily to only have kids who have the ability or the parents or the financial resources to get to a 4-year or even 2-year school. So as mayor, I would implement a plan I introduced a couple of years ago to radically change how we look at workforce development, how we build on on the possibilities of the city. And look, when I talk to parents who are looking for a better way, they don't have movability because we don't have my plan, which was NYC under 3, so that we could subsidize daycare. And many of us have worked, in fact, we've worked together on that issue.
That's right.
To make sure that we target the kids and the parents that need that. If we actually invested in daycare and childcare, we would send 20,000 to 30,000 women back into the workforce, generating $500 million a year. Remember, we said that if we could go out and simply put that in place, have an upskill development plan working with CUNY, we could fundamentally change the economy of New York City. Suddenly, it's simply not, a trickle-down city of the mayor appropriating funding, fighting with the city council. We also have to think about how we play chess a little bit, how we start laying the groundwork so that we can build the economy with a good mayor or a bad mayor. We have to start laying the groundwork for our people. And what that takes is not simply introducing a piece of legislation or doing a Twitter-oriented press conference. What this means is building an administration of qualified individuals who have great capacity and expertise. And quite frankly, there's nobody who has a 30-year record of attracting the best and brightest into government in hundreds of positions. That's where Eric made the big mistake. He took his own gang, put them in City Hall. What he should have done was get the best and the brightest during a transition, so we wouldn't even be having some of these conversations today.
Me next or him next?
Brad will be next, the controller, sorry. It makes sense in my head that we're going this way, but I wasn't shared with you, I'm sorry.
I'm really moved by seeing my friends Brian Colon and Michelle Delauz in the room. And Brian, with your permission, can I tell a little of your story? So I started working with Brian when I was at the Fifth Avenue Committee when he was 20. I had gotten tangled up in the criminal justice system, was living in some affordable housing. Fifth Avenue Committee had developed it. He came and said, there is so much potential in people in our neighborhood who are either coming out of jail or prison or just in our schools and our homes. Let's create some workforce development programs that help those folks grow and thrive. And that has grown into Brooklyn Workforce Innovations, which has helped over 5,000 people get good jobs in commercial driving and network cable installation, in affordable housing services and a whole range of fields. And Brian helped create out of that a program specifically for folks with criminal legal system involvement. He himself went on to a job at Cases and is now a leader at Greenwich House. And what is possible for people when we invest in their potential with smart workforce development and help see not just that they need enough to pay the rent, but to grow and become those leaders is kind of amazing. So it's moving to see you. I haven't seen you in a while. What workforce development can do in people's lives is incredible. But we're not paying attention to it in so many ways. So Scott is right that CUNY needs to be a much more vibrant partner here. I'm calling for municipal control of CUNY so that it could be a partner again in this in the way it should be. Half our nurses, a third of our teachers come from CUNY. Baruch was set up to help for the criminal justice system work. For the accounting work, and John Jay for the criminal justice work. CUNY, again, could be working with all of you, both with your workforce development programs, but also with the social service sector in general to be helping people get the certificate that will take them up one notch on the ladder so that people are growing to become the leaders like those folks in this room. And then that is a huge place where I, as mayor, will be looking for people to come work at City Hall, to come work in the city agencies that partner with and contract with the social service sector so we could make a whole lot more leaders like Brian in the future.
Thank you.
So with regards to workforce development, I think one critical piece is that we do have to start much more vocational training at an earlier age. I think it needs to be incorporated into a lot of our high school education system, frankly, right? We need to be preparing New Yorkers for the jobs that also exist alongside educating them for the world that is outside. And I think there are a few examples across New York City that show us potential North Stars for how we can do so. And I also think that workforce development, and this is kind of echoes something that Speaker Adams had said here recently, in incorporating it into our educational system, but also ensuring that it's equitable across all of New York City. We have to make sure that people do not have to travel into Manhattan for workforce development opportunities, that they not solely exist in specific places, but rather that they can be in every single borough that New Yorkers live in. Because that is also catching up to the reality of the city we are in, as opposed to the one that we built about 100 years ago, where everything had to flow through Manhattan.
Thank you.
So I come from a community and represent a district where people often wag their finger at all of the things that are wrong, and rarely do they give us the things that we need. And I have stood after shootings, after violent incidents, and spoken to my neighbors, and they have told me, Z, we don't want to do any of this. What we want is a job. Give us a job. It was one of the motivating factors for me to write and pass with many people I see in this room, the Clean Slate Act, to give people an opportunity to be involved in their economy. So workforce development is not just about the job. It is about public safety. It is about economic development. It's about empowerment. And that is something that I'd prioritize as mayor. I think we need a permanent workforce development fund. And I think it's important that we shift the culture around workforce development such that it's not just an avoidance of poverty, but this is about professional development, and this is about a permanent ladder up the career. Thank you.
This next one is quick, so I know
Can
you
I
have to
answer that question?
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Hi, Katie.
I'm sorry, Senator. I got
That's
distracted.
okay, Katie. Well, look, I think in New York City, we've done a poor job of leveraging our cultural diversity and our cultural competency to really be able to build a workforce that attracts more businesses. We are living in a globalized economy where New York City really does need to fight to stay and to remain the best city in the world. That's what makes us proud New Yorkers. And yet we have put a lot of emphasis on higher education with all of its flaws, with CUNY still being a little too expensive for some New Yorkers. And it's true that we need much more vocational thought when it comes to secondary education in our schools. Our youth should really have every single economic opportunity at their disposal. To me, workforce development happens the minute we're born, unfortunately. You know, in talking about childcare, I usually talk about it as a triple workforce investment. Yes, we're allowing parents to get back to work. Yes, we're fighting for living wages for childcare workers that most often happen to be women and women of color, but really our babies are about 20 years away from being a worker themselves. And if you grew up in certain communities like mine, there is something that is called the baby word gap, where children who grew up in less affluent communities have heard about 3 million words fewer than their more affluent counterparts by the time they're just 1 year old. And that leaves us a little further behind from the starting line than others. So being able to have childcare experts, not babysitters, but recognizing them as the educators that they are so that they can identify those learning and developmental disabilities as early as possible so that we can address them is really, really critical. But overall, what we want to do is build an economy that is comprehensive. We've already started to move into the service economy. The gig economy is full of misclassification of work that doesn't allow people to really be able to negotiate their wages. I mean, you'll talk to an Uber and Lyft driver, some of them will even tell you they feel that they're a small business owner, but they're a small business owner that's not able to tell Uber, I need to get paid more. I'm going to need to bargain my conditions with you. And that is a problem. What we need is a full embrace of the care economy, from childcare all the way to those who take care of our seniors and our most vulnerable New Yorkers, people with disabilities. We have been undervaluing, we have been feminizing poverty since the beginning of time. And that is not okay, because more often than not, we end up being single mothers. I'm one myself. And it makes it very difficult for us to have a fighting chance to enter and actually be able to stay in the middle class. So thinking about this holistically, making sure that, you know, more than a fund, we have someone in charge thinking about this full time and how we are not just simply working in silos with each of the non-for-profits and all of the different sectors and the unions and all of the reentry programs. Look, over the years, I have allocated millions of dollars in the state budget to helmets to hard hats to help our veterans, to NEW, which is non-traditional employment for women, to all sorts of the apprenticeships and pre-apprenticeship programs that are available. But it's always not enough. And that's because I think we've been working in silos for too long, and we need one dedicated chief workforce development officer at City Hall who's thinking this through every single day. Thank you.
Thank you. And everybody answered, right? Now I've lost track of myself, sorry. This question is about the federal government and our incoming president. What is your plan to engage with the new administration, particularly the Department for Health and Human Services.
Can we have a moment of silence first, please? I hope folks saw the report that we put out on protecting New York City, which was the first effort to really reckon with the risks that the Trump presidency poses for New York City. And it is many, and many of them run through the budget. The federal government provides about $7 billion of the city's just basic operating budget. A lot of that is what flows through to social service contracted organizations. And then there's a whole bunch of other places through H&H and NYCHA that it's well beyond that. And part of what's terrifying is not just the cuts, which would be big enough by themselves. Last time they proposed to eliminate entirely the Public Housing Capital Fund and cut NYCHA's operating budget by a third. But we know there's also, and especially in places like healthcare, likely to be a weaponization of that funding. So H&H, about $1 billion of its $4 billion budget comes from federal funding. And it won't be surprising when the federal government says, okay, you could keep that money if you agree to stop providing abortions at H&H institutions. And we are not going to do that. But we also don't have an easy source of that $1 billion. So these really are going to be challenges. Some of that is just being real clear what they are and getting ready. Some of that is there are places New York City institutions have to elevate, and health is really one of them. Unfortunately, President Trump and RFK Jr. are likely to destroy the federal public health infrastructure, to destroy it. Our former governor and maybe other mayoral candidate also worked hard to undermine the state health department in terrible ways by directing them to do things that got people killed during COVID, lying about it to grieving families and to Congress. Thankfully, the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene and H&H are amongst the best public health institutions in the country and in the world, and having a mayor who will make sure they are led by first-rate professionals, not by political patronage appointees, and certainly not by vaccine deniers, will make that a place that New York City is a beacon, as we have been, on what public health leadership looks like. And we'll have to work together to find the resources, but we are going to guarantee that New York City is a place that continues to take leadership on core public health, and that is going to take a deep partnership with communities like we did in census outreach, like we did, not enough, but some in COVID, and that means partnerships with all of you on the ground in the languages that people speak in your neighborhood, with real cultural capacity, and a focus on protecting public health.
I think the first thing the mayor of New York City has to be able to do is to stand up to the federal administration. And that's something that we are missing in our current mayor. We have a mayor who has refused to denounce President Trump's promise to create the single largest deportation force in American history. We have a mayor who's taken his platform and used it instead to compliment Elon Musk and the many different platform initiatives that are being rolled out in the past weeks and in the weeks and months to come. And I think, to some of what Brad said, we have to be willing to stand up and actually fight for New York City values and New York City institutions, and that extends into into when it comes to New Yorkers' healthcare. And I think knowing that we can actually say no to the federal administration is critically important, as opposed to what we're seeing right now, which is an effort to simply bend in whichever way is necessary to stay in their good graces. And if we are going to say no to the federal administration and whatever ridiculous things they will be putting forward, whether it be with regards to health or any other issue, then we will also have to be able to go to Albany and advocate for increased taxes on the wealthiest New Yorkers, as well as corporations that do business across New York State, to make up that shortfall. And this is somewhere that we've actually been before, because in 2020, we had thought that there was a real prospect of Donald Trump being elected to a second term. And as part of that, what we did is prepared a campaign to raise that kind of revenue. We ended up raising more than $4 billion in new revenue that ended up becoming critical to actually fulfilling the state's longstanding obligation to New York City public schools. This is the kind of example that we can use again when we are inevitably forced to choose between that $7 billion and our values and our neighbors and our principles. And just to the specific topic of health, I think that one of the main things about my campaign that is the premise of this campaign is that government can actually make people's lives better, that it can make working people's lives easier. And there are few examples that we can point to, even here in New York City, where that has been the case, but one of them has been, at the height of COVID, the way that we handled the rollout of centers where you could get your vaccine, of test and trace, and a lot of the successes of that work was through the partnership between the city administration and community-based organizations like some that are in this room today. And I think that that is a model that we have to use as a North Star in the coming years to ensure that when we are standing up against a federal government, we are also standing alongside our neighbors and community organizations that are the ones who are actually trusted far more than any level of government, whether it be city, state, or federal. Use that trust to ensure that we keep New Yorkers safe and ensure that they continue to follow what we know to be the appropriate healthcare guidelines.
Thank you. State Senator. Oh, you go, yeah.
Is it me?
Oh, sorry, it's
Yeah.
State Senator Ramos.
Yeah.
I didn't realize we lost the other senator.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, well, she said senator, and so I figured there was the next senator. But now I'm the next senator. Hello.
No, I think, do I go or no?
She goes, yeah, I'm sorry. I've confused this for everybody. I envisioned it like a...
I mean, you can go first. Would
Yes.
you like to go first?
State
No,
Senator.
no, go ahead. It's the FAQ voice that got me.
You can go, Senator Ramos, sorry.
Okay. There is much reason to Trump-proof New York. There is much reason to build a wall of laws that will keep Trump from invading our quality of life and our spaces. And yet, at the same time, we depend on the federal government so damn much for funding that we're going to have to maintain a professional relationship with people that we don't necessarily agree with people we don't like. And that's going to be a challenge, but not an insurmountable one. That being said, one of the biggest obstacles or challenges that we have in our public health system in relationship to the federal government is Medicare reimbursements. As it is, we are getting oftentimes 30 cents, 40 cents to the dollar for a lot of the services that are performed at our health and hospitals. And that is, I expect, only going to get worse over the next 4 years. So being able to have a chief revenue officer at City Hall that is thinking outside of the box of how we're going to generate more money for our government to be able to deliver where there is a shortfall from the federal government is going to be critical. Because to me, public health is synonymous with public safety. That's where it begins. And being able to help New Yorkers access the mental health services that they need is especially critical right now. I thought that coming out of after the pandemic, and granted, you know, my district was the epicenter of the pandemic. Nowhere did we lose more New Yorkers than 11369 East Elmhurst, Queens. I thought we would actually be building mental health wings at every city hospital, which to me is really smart because in communities like mine and many of yours, mental health is still greatly stigmatized. And quite frankly, people should be able to get the help that they need in person if they want without their neighbor having to know their business. So if you walk into a hospital with a backache or a heartache, and you run into your next door neighbor, there's no reason to tell them in detail why you're there. You can tell them whatever you want. But the important thing is that you were able to get into that hospital and access the help that you needed. There's a lot to be said about mental health, about upskilling EMT and EMS workers and injecting clinicians and EMS workers into the Be Heard program so that they're doing and leading those emergency responses to mental health crises. But the other thing that's concerning to me about RFK is I expect there to be changes to the FDA and understanding what type of access to food, because food is medicine. And here in New York, we have a very broken food system. I mean, only in New York do we have so much access to wonderful, delicious food, especially in Jackson Heights. Come spend your dollars. Wear comfy pants. But we have to make sure, of course, that everything that we're able to access to eat, especially our little ones, formula, right, is actually safe for consumption. And so here in New York, we're going to actually have to step up in building a food system that we haven't had before, really, that is comprehensive, making sure our food pantries are fully stocked so that New Yorkers are really able to live their healthiest lives. Thank you.
Thank you.
Like many people in this room, I'm sure, I lost a loved one. My mom took COVID. And there was no doubt at the time she died that Donald Trump had blood on him because of his bad decisions. And now we see a Trump administration coming back, making bad appointments. And we are going to have to devise a city strategy that is going to protect the social infrastructure of the city. And Eric Adams this is all about the campaign to pardon, not the campaign to get reelected. And we're going to have to deal with that while he's mayor. We may have another candidate, as Brad mentioned, who made such bad decisions that other grandmothers and mothers died in nursing homes, and then he tried to write a best-selling book about it. That doesn't qualify to be mayor of New York. But let me throw out specifically, because yes, we're going to do the press conferences. We're going to issue reports. We're going to do all that kind of work. But how do we start creating the infrastructure protection? I want to raise one issue that we should raise in this debate, which is the fact that our women and minority-owned businesses and not-for-profits are going to struggle in this presidency the way they are struggling now. We are certifying MWBEs, but we're not giving them the contracts. You all know this, right? We don't do that financially, although I started to equalize that when I was controller. And one of the things I want to go back to, and this is probably for the controller debate, is we have got to hold this administration accountable agency by agency about how we fund and give contracts to MWBs. We need a chief diversity officer in every city agency working on it because it's hard work. I appointed the city's first chief diversity officer when I was controller. I looked at every city agency and letter graded them based on the spend with African American, Latinos, women, etc. Because it was important to create a guide. I failed agencies, I gave agencies a B, I gave agencies an A, but I kept the pressure on de Blasio to make sure every year they were going to get that scorecard. And we started to change things. Full disclosure, I audited the controller's office when I was there. And I gave myself a C. I don't brag about it, but I gave myself a C. Took me 4 years to get to an A. And the reason I tell you that story, it's hard work. You actually have to look at those contracts, build capacity to make that difference. What's at stake is billions of dollars. I still remember during one of my roundtables, an African-American young woman said to me, "It's really incredible that I get a contract as a young publicist from Nike, and I can't get a publicist contract at the Department of Education." And everyone knows why that's true, because I'm not on the favored list. I'm not big enough, and I'm not connected enough. So step one is, if we're going to start to Trump-proof this city, we have to go where the need is greatest. And our MWBE nonprofit and for-profit infrastructure is going to be in great danger when the federal government starts to come for us. Second, I also believe very strongly that as far as Trump goes, we also have to have a mayor who has the skills to negotiate this. You know, when I was in the assembly, it was a lot harder back then because we had the Republicans controlling the state Senate in Albany. You had Pataki as governor. I went through that in my life. And that's when rents were weakened. I was one of the few Democrats that voted against weakening our rent laws because that was on the table and it actually happened. So we also have to figure out how to negotiate, how to build relationships. I hope Hakeem Jeffries in 18 months will be the Speaker of the House. That will begin to change things. We got to hold on to the next election, and that is something I would work on as mayor with Hakeem and with our partners in Washington.
Thank you. And this is our final question, and we're going to take questions from the audience still. So if you have a little QR code, and we'll start with the assembly member. And it's about affordability and working with the state, particularly looking at issues like congestion pricing, accessing childcare, the City of Yes, which is getting voted on today in the City Council. How will you work with the governor, whoever the governor is, if you win and you're serving the full term, on these or other issues to help New Yorkers stay in this city despite its prohibitive costs of living?
So I think this is the number one crisis in New York City, which is cost of living. We are constantly told that it is rich people leaving New York City because of increased taxes. But what the studies actually bear out is it's working class New Yorkers, and it's disproportionately black and brown working class New Yorkers who are leaving these 5 boroughs in the hopes of finding a place where their dollar can go just a little bit further. We see this in the fact that more than a majority of New Yorkers spend over half of their paycheck each month to go to either a landlord or a bank, and there's a quarter of New Yorkers not very far behind. I think one of the clear things, the first cost in many New Yorkers' lives, and in most New Yorkers' lives, is housing. So as the mayor, you have the power to set the rents through the Rent Guidelines Board for about 2.5 million New Yorkers. We've seen previous administrations use this to give some relief to tenants. I would do the same. I would have a rent freeze for every single year for more than 2 million New Yorkers who live in that housing. Additionally, after housing, you see childcare as the top cost for New Yorkers. I would work with the governor on ensuring that we are funding making universal childcare a reality for every New York family. Because there are too many New Yorkers who are not even having children in this city, or if they are leaving this city because they can't afford $20,000 to $25,000 a year in new costs in their life. And I know the classic rejoinder, whenever you propose something that could actually help people, is how are you going to pay for it? And what I would say is we are paying for it right now. There are estimates that we have lost about $20 billion in economic output in the last 2 years alone because of New Yorkers who are leaving because of childcare costs. And what we've seen in Quebec is that when you invest in universal childcare, you can actually see a 10-to-1 return. So I would work with the governor to get that money for the initial down payment, all in the knowledge that what we would see is a return on that investment quite soon. The last thing I would just add here is public transit is the lifeblood of this city. And it is, frankly, the economic engine for this entire state. And yet what we have right now is a system not befitting a status of a world-class city. And so I think that what we need to do is, I have supported congestion pricing, and I've done so because it is going to transform the lives of working-class New Yorkers across this city. This is the key, not only to ensuring that the MTA has sufficient funding to actually repair our 100-year-old signal modernization status. I live in Astoria, where I take either the N, the W, or I go on the other side and take the R. These are signals that are set to be changed if we have the funding in the next capital plan. Every New Yorker deserves the signals we see on the L train and the 7 train. Every New Yorker deserves that kind of on-time performance. And finally, you as the mayor of the city of New York, you own the streets of this city. We have buses that travel at 8 miles an hour, the slowest in the country. As an elected official in Albany, I launched the Fix the MTA plan. I don't need to describe why it was called that. I think we all know. And in that plan, we were fighting to make buses free. We won a first-of-its-kind free bus pilot in New York City. We made one bus route in every borough free. And what we saw over the 12 months that that pilot was active was that it increased ridership by 30%. It reduced assaults on bus drivers by 38.9%. And we saw that of the new riders, the majority made less than $28,000 a year, and 11% of them were previously driving a car or taking a taxi. So we saw environmental benefits of reducing congestion, fewer cars on the road, public safety benefits of less assaults on buses, and economic benefits of bringing people onto public transit to empower them to go about their city. That is something that we can make possible across every borough of New York City with the partnership between the mayor and the governor. And I do believe that it is possible because we've already seen the inklings of it in the last few years.
On January 1st, 2026, when the new mayor takes office, Kathy Hochul will still be governor of the state of New York. And I have a very strong record of being able to work with Governor Hochul to deliver on greater affordability when it comes to childcare. Through our coalition that's also been addressing child poverty, which I've been championing. I passed the law to reduce child poverty over the next 10 years by half. We have been able to leverage my Early Learning Child Care Act, my child care plan, over the last few years in order to increase eligibility for existing child care subsidies. We've gone from 275% of the federal poverty line to be covered by those subsidies, all the way up to 500% of the federal poverty line. That means that a family of 4 whose household income is around $80,000, $90,000 a year can finally be able to access child care subsidies. However, right now in New York State, a worker who makes under minimum wage, who works part-time, who, does the old New York hustle and has a bunch of side gigs in order to make ends meet, is not able to access child care subsidies. You have to actually make at least minimum wage. Well, right now, I am waiting for Governor Hochul to sign my bill in order to do away with the minimum wage requirement in order to be able to access child care subsidies. And that is really important because my district has an average household income of $30,000 a year, below minimum wage. So a lot of my neighbors have not been able to access the great work that we've been able to do in order to expand those child care subsidies, and that's a problem. Housing is also a very big affordability issue, but it's not enough to appoint the right people to the Rent Guidelines Board. We have to really heal a lot of the division and the wounds that have been sown in between the landlord and the tenant community. And I know that that is difficult, but at the crux of our income inequality here in New York is property taxes. And what we need desperately is property tax reform. It is not okay that I, as a rent-stabilized tenant in Jackson Heights, pay from my rent through my landlord $5,000 a year in property tax. Last night I had a fundraiser in Richmond Hill, heard about how homeowners are paying $7,000 a year in property tax. Then you talk to someone who owns a brownstone in Park Slope and they pay $3,000 a year in property tax. And then we wonder why there aren't enough people interested in investing in building more affordable housing in communities that really, really need it. And there's a lot of talk about how we need to cap the property tax in New York, and that is true. But we also just simply need to be able to comply with the law. The city is not complying with the property tax law. We are not conducting property value assessments correctly. And the Department of Finance is the entity that should be in charge of doing this. We would actually be able to generate a little more revenue than we already have from property taxes if we actually had equal application of the law across the 5 boroughs. And that is to help those landlords actually be able to meet and incentivize them, along with a lot of other tools that are going to be needed, to be able to say, yes, you know what, I'm not going to fight you guys so hard on being able to reach that rent freeze. Because more than making promises, we have to have plans to get there. And that is what New Yorkers are expecting us to deliver, because the affordability issue is what's crippling our city. And we have to make sure that people who look like me and who look like you can continue to afford to make a living in the city that they love.
As someone who's gone to many mayoral forums in my day, this is not my first rodeo. The problem with these forums is all of us will end up spending $200 billion in promises because it's just easy to do. So I just want to caution all of us, with Trump coming in and Hochul not being New York City budget friendly, we also have to think strategically, and City Hall has to think strategically on what we spend our money on. And I first want to say to Zoran, I respect his work on the MTA, but with all due respect, if I'm mayor, I am not making buses free. Write this down. I'm not taking $800 million out of the system. I think we should invest that money to make sure that we have the bus plan that I put forth a couple of years ago, because buses help people who make less than $28,000 a year. These are the frontline workers, the heroes of COVID, and our future is expanding those bus routes, but we're going to have to pay for it. So step one, no free buses. Targeted affordability and raising fair fares.
Fair fares.
We didn't talk before this. We raise fair fares, we target affordability, And that's how we deal with that question. In terms of how we also protect working people, and I know today we're passing City of Yes, and everybody, you know, I don't know if you're a NIMBY or a YIMBY or BIMBY or whatever you are today. I'm just an old Mitchell-Lama activist, you know, back in the day. I believe very strongly that we have to think strategically about how we build the next generation of affordable housing. And I just want to throw out a word that we really don't hear anymore. How about low-income housing? Does anyone want that anymore? How about affordable housing? Does anyone want that anymore, right? These are not words that are widely used, and I hope they're going to be used at the city council today. But look, we have 1,000 vacant lots in this city. 1,000. The city owns them. They're our land. They're your land. They're our people's land. These are not the land of the landowners. We pay for that land. It's city-owned. Why don't we give those parcels of land to not-for-profit groups that have expertise in building affordable housing? I've done multiple audits of this, created a whole plan for this. We could build tens of thousands of units, Mitchell-Lama too. And why can't we do big things again? LaGuardia built public housing. Remember him? I was there. No. Lindsay built Mitchell-Lama, greatest middle-income housing program devised in maybe the free world. We can do big things again. De Blasio built affordable housing. Bloomberg built affordable housing. This guy, nothing, nothing. The land is sitting there. We have to grab it with subsidy, because if we can do that and agree that we can build a transportation network for working people, at the same time we build the next generation of affordable housing, then that's what we should be doing. And lastly, because I don't want people to think, oh my God, you know, I guess, what do they call him now, NIMBYs, he's not for density. I just want to remind people that when I became Manhattan Borough President, I worked with an organization called Picture the Homeless. And we went throughout the entire borough of Manhattan, going lot by lot, identifying vacant lots and where we could build. We did this before there were computers that can do this in 6 minutes. My predecessor as borough president, Mark Levine, he did this whole thing on computer. It was really fascinating, but I had to do it the hard way with a pencil and a pen. We sent hundreds of volunteers out, and that was so long ago. The fact that we're here today with the same lots, with the same inability to build affordable housing, imagine what LaGuardia and Lindsay would think of back in the day that we did not move this at all. And that's what I would do as mayor, and I'll get it done because I've gotten it done.
So the congestion pricing fight is a great example about how I, as mayor, would work in relationship to the governor in Albany to deliver affordability for working class New Yorkers. I teamed up with some folks in this room on the campaign that won congestion pricing, got the state legislature to pass it back in 2019. We actually then got this governor on board. Then she got off board, and when that happened, I convened the coalition that brought the litigation that unpaused congestion pricing and is unlocking $15 billion so we can modernize Zoran signals, put elevators in our subways, expand the 2nd Avenue subway, and get it in place before Donald Trump becomes president. That is $15 billion to invest in mass transit that we would have lost, that we would not have without the coalition that organized to win it and the litigation to force its implementation before Donald Trump becomes president. And I saw the governor last night at the Community Preservation Corporation gala, and we are going to work together on many issues, including the implementation of congestion pricing. So you can organize, you can litigate, and you can work together to implement. 3 quick things that the mayor could do with Albany on affordability for working families that will really matter. First is childcare. There's a great campaign, New Yorkers United for Childcare. Many of you are probably involved. If not, look them up and get involved. That's a statewide campaign. Governor's not going to do childcare, universal childcare for the mayor of New York City. A statewide campaign to win universal childcare for all New Yorkers and the revenue from Albany to deliver it is possible if we organize and fight for that. People recognize at this moment we need to act for working families' affordability. I think that's got the best possibility. Second, because what the mayor said earlier this week on immigrants was so horrific in his pardon seeking, I can't believe I'm going to praise something else he did this week, but the proposal the administration put out yesterday to exempt New Yorkers from up to $50,000 to having to pay the personal income tax at a cost of only about $50 million is a great idea. Let's work together to get that passed in Albany. It is substantial tax relief for working and lower middle class New Yorkers. It's a good idea. It only costs $50 million. Let's win it next year. And housing is third. If you're looking for the affordable housing mayor, I've been working on affordable housing my whole life at Fifth Avenue Committee with Michelle and others, and at the Pratt Center. The Gowanus rezoning, biggest rezoning of the last 15 years, most affordable housing, and most community support because we enable people to see themselves in the future we were creating. And what we should do with Albany here is go back to the focus on affordable, cooperative, multifamily home ownership, a new generation. It's not going to look like the Mitchell Lamas of the past, but when you say to people, we need to build more in our already existing neighborhoods, and they say, I don't know, and then you say, what if that was the next generation of co-ops that your kids and your neighbors could own? It changes the conversation about how people think about growth and density. We can make the next generation of affordable homeownership possible for human service workers, for municipal employees. That's a vision for the growth of New York City that people could really believe in. Finally, one important suggestion for how we pay for all this, and you guys have an important role to play even in the Trump presidency, because one thing he's likely to do is eliminate the cap on the SALT tax deduction. And that is likely to bring, if he does it, which he has said he's going to, $19 billion that is currently being paid by New Yorkers in taxes to the federal government back into the pockets of New Yorkers, but disproportionately to the very wealthiest New Yorkers. Some benefits for middle-income families, but overwhelmingly that $19 billion is for wealthy New Yorkers, including many of the people who, and thanks to them for doing it, are on the boards of our nonprofits and care a lot about this city. And we are very likely, I think, if we want the things we're talking about here, or if we see the kinds of cuts that we fear from the Trump administration, going to need to say to them, some chunk of that $19 billion that you aren't sending to Washington is going to have to be invested in our human service infrastructure and the affordable future of this city. That will have to be done by the state legislature, but I promise as mayor, I would like to work with you to build the coalition that makes it possible.
Thank you. So I know we are at time, but these two questions from the audience, we're just going to do two. They're going to, if you could answer them like rapid fire, like we don't have a buzzer, but very quickly. So I think the first up we have is Shakira Kennedy from National Association of Social Workers.
Hi, everyone. My name is Shakira Kennedy, and no problem. But thank you all for being here, and this has been very informative. So my question today is that there are over 600,000 social workers in New York City, and the bulk of those social workers actually make up the human service professionals that work within our nonprofit agencies. And these professionals are actually leaving the workforce due to low wages, poor conditions, creating high turnover, as under-supported, less experienced staff fill their roles. How will your administration improve wages and working conditions to reduce turnover, support staff, and ensure these careers remain viable and also fulfilling?
You could just start. I don't know. Now I messed up my own order. Yeah, so Brad starts. Thank you.
Thank God for social workers. So thank you. And to every one of them, I mean, coming out of the pandemic, it is clear to everyone that mental health needs in this city are greater than they have been maybe ever, but certainly in my living memory. And we've got to do something to invest in it. So that bill I mentioned, the living wage bill that Althea Stevens, who chairs the Human Services Committee in the Council, sponsors and is working on, I know, some with you and our office on some changes to, I think is the key here. We need to update the living wage law so that our contracted social service workers, including our social workers, get paid what they need to be paid. And then, it needs to be a ladder in which people can see future to keep moving up rather than out. And we can and must do it.
So it's a very tough issue, and we definitely have to create wages that are commensurate with the experience, the professionalism, and the need. Look, I have 2 kids now. They're now, believe it or not, in middle school, and we see it every day. I talk to parents, and our kids are not finished with COVID. right? And I don't think people fully understand that it's not done. And our kids need these kind of mental health resources and the personnel to deal with it. And I don't have to tell you, right? The schools that can afford it and the parents that can afford it, get it, right? There is a difference between privileged parents like myself who can get my kids what they need with a credit card. And then there's a whole lot of parents, single parents who live in public housing, and that's not even an option. So we need you to do well so our kids can do well. And I can tell you, as former controller, I'm not as, the numbers don't come to me as quickly as it does with Brad because, it's been a delayed reaction. But the truth is, we both can count.
Everything
can
is
all
under
count.
control.
Yes. When we leave, we're out of control. But right now, we're. But the truth is, I could prove to you that your pay raise has a multiplier. We actually save money by raising your salary. Isn't that incredible? And that's something we should think about as we reconstitute City Hall. One thing I know is how to pay the bills, the skills to pay the bills, and this is a bill worth paying.
You can clap for him. There are 2 bills in state government right now that need to be passed and signed into law as soon as possible. That is State Senator Roxanne Persaud's Just Pay bill, which there are many of you who have been championing that effort, sending buses up to Albany to do that advocacy work that is critical. Thank you. And the second is my wage board bill. Look, I think the best way to make sure that any worker gets paid is for workers to have a voice on the job. And even though the not-for-profit might be the intermediary boss because you're really getting paid through the government, we have to make sure that government is at the table, making sure that we are listening to the workers, not only to address just compensation, but to hear about working conditions. I mean, when I was at Local 371, I heard of many times when social workers would go to houses, addressing ACS calls, and they might encounter someone who was going to hurt them. And that is real. So we want to have to hear from the workers themselves and make sure that they have a binding voice, right? That what they say actually comes to fruition, and that is only made possible by a contract negotiating table where their voice is as weighted as the employer's voice.
I see social workers as frontline workers. And I think that if you're a frontline worker, you need to be at the front of the line when it comes to everything beyond your responsibilities in that job. Because right now what we're seeing is a natural outcome. We are asking people to sacrifice themselves, to sacrifice their life, their professional aspirations, and what they can actually pay for their families in order to do the work that the city needs. And that is not a sustainable relationship between some of the most critical work that happens in this city and what the city is willing to pay for. So I think we are all in broad agreement in terms of the necessity of actually paying social workers what they are worth. And that is also part of the larger conversation around nonprofit contracting, where the city has to pay for the entire cost of service when giving a contract to a nonprofit organization. It cannot be 80% and then, inshallah, the rest of the 20. That's not how it works. That's not how it works. Because when you hear inshallah, it just means no. I'm going to tell you right now. That's what it means most of the time. So I think that we have to shift that. And I think it's for too long, the nonprofit work, it's seen as somebody doing work that is more important than themselves. But even in that video I saw of Marlena, at some point she says, I ask myself if there will come a time where I cannot do this any longer. Where there'll come a time where I cannot afford these kinds of sacrifices any longer because I'll have to take care of my family. I'll have to take care of myself. We can't let that time come. And it's not because people have to become individual acts of heroism. It's because we need to take care of them. So the rational decision is to stay in their position.
Thank you. And our final question is from Melissa Ossie from University Settlement. Someone has the mic.
Yes. Good morning. Thank you so much for all that you shared today on so many aspects that touch the lives of our communities and our staff. I'm Melissa Ossie from University Settlement, and many of you have spoken about childcare and after school already, and I want to thank you for a lot of the specifics. I think you see a dream team of people in the room that would actually bring plans to fruition and bring these services to more and more people in New York, and that New Yorkers cannot really get by without good childcare and good after-school programs. They are multipliers for certain within our communities. So how would you make the system accessible for more families and support the people providing the care? And since we're working on specifics today, there is a really broken relationship specifically between the DOE and the community-based organizations. And if we're getting into specifics, procurement, payment, and parity, we really do have to work on the question. As mayor, what would you do on that particular part of the problem?
You can do whatever you want. You can
So
monitor, you know.
We talk about, especially for working people, the struggle of just making or staying here. Truth is, the billionaires didn't leave to go to Texas and Florida. They just bought another house temporarily because they realized then they had to live there. And that's a mistake. But the reality is, we've got to give some relief so that people can stay here, the people who are making $30,000 to $200,000 a year. And the way to do that is to have the aspirational goal at City Hall, NYC under 3, childcare. We all talked about that today. We have to baseline 3K and pre-K and get the DOE the hell out of this and recognize that our kids need this help because early education is fundamental to our children, and I know this, we know this full hand. Second, we shouldn't stop there. We have to think about after school. I know this growing up in Washington Heights. You know when we all got in trouble? After school from 3 to 5. Hasn't changed in 30 years. That's a mistake. After school prevents kids from getting into harm's way. Less interactions with police officers. This has to be the model. But right now, it's only about who has the computer to get online for after school, to push the button for after school. If you're in public school, if you're in private school, you pay it with a $60,000 tuition. This whole thing has to change, and the way we do it is by implementing plans and taking a DOE and finally right-sizing it. This DOE over the last 4 years has just been outrageous. And as a parent, I'm telling you, they're outrageous about how they deal and interact with kids and schools. So that has to change. How I would deal with it specifically, I dealt with this for 8 years. I had to deal with DOE and procurement and lack of payments. I blew the whistle on them. I fought them tooth and nail. I know the inner workings of their decision-making process. As controller, I stood ground to make sure that we got those payments. In fact, I went so far is that when an after-school program called up and said, the DOA says, or an agency says that the contract is in the controller's office, once I heard that first story, I would call up the DOE official, put them on the phone with the not-for-profit and say, you're lying. You're lying. But when I'm mayor, we're not going to have to play that game anymore. I will finally fight for procurement reform that I have detailed and outlined over many years. You know, one of the things I really hoped for was when de Blasio was running for re-election, I endorsed him finally in 2017. One day it's Friday, and my chief of staff at the time says to me, I'm leaving, I'll see you later. I said, where are you going? It's Friday. He says, I'm going over to City Hall. I have a top-level meeting on procurement reform. I go, get out of here. They're going to meet with you on procurement reform? Yeah, you endorsed them. You guys are getting along now. I'm taking advantage of it. 3 hours later, she comes back. I said, so do we have procurement reform? She said, we're never going to have procurement reform. Okay? But when I'm mayor, we're going to have procurement reform, and I will share the specific details of what I did and what I know how to do to get it done.
So, Melissa, I don't know if you remember me, but I was that City Hall staffer who came with former Deputy Mayor Richard Bury to University Settlement and see your incredible pre-K because we saw it as such a great model to replicate across the city. And I have to say, I really hope that the program at University Settlement is continuing to serve the amazing families of that area. there is a reason why it was the Deputy Mayor for Strategic Policy Initiatives that was the architect of pre-K, and why we were able to deliver a universal program with free, high-quality, full-day pre-K for the entire city of New York. And we were able to do it with some tinkering that was needed, but we were really able to deliver a functioning system that has since been deteriorated by the current administration. I mean, we even got to deliver on 3K to a certain extent, not full universality, because we were expecting that the next Democratic mayor was going to push us even further closer to serving newborns. That was the idea. We didn't know we were going to end up with a Trump Democrat that doesn't actually believe in early childhood education. But here we are. I mention the deputy mayor because I think outside of the DOE, there's actually many agencies that go into making early childhood care possible. And that, of course, includes the mayor's office for contract services. But it's an interagency effort the minute we're working with community-based organizations. And so there has to be someone that is providing oversight, or working together with the chancellor to make sure that we're following through on what we have promised. Because although we've actually talked a little bit about procurement, and I hope that by now you understand where our value sets are when it comes, or our perspective lives when it comes to procurement reform, and the consequences and accountability that there should be to City Hall when we're not paying on time, so that you're not actually being able to deliver your services. What we need to do is, I think about this holistically, because, we, of course, we needed 6 city agencies in order to deliver on universal pre-K. It was, yes, the DOE, yes, MOX, but it was also DOI, and it was FDNY, and it was DOB, and it was so many people and so much to do that actually using technology to streamline a lot of this work so that it lives in one place in a modernized computer system shouldn't be such a far-fetched idea in the year 2024, and definitely not by January 1st of 2026. Thanks.
I think the word that you said that was really stuck out to me is parity. I think it's critically important that if we want workers, a workforce which is overwhelmingly women of color, to continue to provide the work of childcare, then we need to ensure that they are not earning $10, whether it's an at-home service, or about $16 if it's at a center. They need to be having parity with teachers within the DOE, because we cannot call it early childhood education. We cannot talk about the importance of what a child experiences from birth to 5 if we don't want to pay the people who will actually teach them the same levels at what they are being paid for later on in those child's lives. So I think that's critically important. Second of all, I think we have to move from a political instinct of patronage to one of excellence. That is at the core of making government work for working people. It has to be excellent. It has to be at a standard where people can trust that you will actually deliver on what it is that you are talking about. Because what we have right now, we often think of Trump and Republicans of having a monopoly on sowing distrust in government. But we have to understand that it occurs within our party as well. And the current mayor has told New Yorkers that there is a seat for every family that wants one when it comes to 3K, that there's a seat. And what is unsaid in that promise is there might be a seat being offered to somebody who lives on Hillside Avenue, and they have to go all the way to Morris Park in the Bronx. That's the kind of promise that's being made. And if you hear that as a New Yorker, you ask yourself, why should I ever trust any of these programs? Why should I ever trust any of these promises? We need to finally align our rhetoric and our reality, and that is going to be a core part of delivering the universal childcare that New Yorkers deserve, and doing so with the lessons of the successes we've had in previous administrations and building upon them even more so.
Well, Melissa, thank you for your question, even more for the work. Love university settlement, love settlement houses in general. I know a lot are in the room. Thank you. The person I heard about not getting the 3K slot from was my dental hygienist, like while I was in the dentist chair. And she's got the Novocaine needle out, literally, I'm not kidding. Go on, it's dental, you can go talk to her. She's like, Comptroller, I heard every 3-year-old was getting a seat in their neighborhood. Why am I 140th on the list with my kid? And like just holding, anyway. So yes, I mean, having a city government that delivers on its promises is critical. We don't have it. You're going to elect a mayor to deliver it. That universal child care approach that New Yorkers for Child Care is organizing for includes after school. And we have to fight together to win it, because that's where the resources are going to come from. And of course, our kids were in an after-school program. And when you see what happens in them, like something pretty magical happens with a great settlement house or good nonprofit-run program. It's not just essential childcare for that working family who doesn't get off at 3 o'clock and needs to stay till 6, though it is that. It's also that that's the time when the kids get to do sports and arts and life skills and a trip maybe, or a field trip, all those mental health and social emotional learning and well-being. That's when it can happen. And at best, in some cases, that school becomes a community school. There can even be integration between what the nonprofit's doing in after school and what's happening in the school day. And when that happens, new like social infrastructure is created and something really magical happens. And that is what our nonprofit human service providers do. It's not just contracted out essential work, it's turning them into community-based vehicles of like social well-being together. And I've seen that magic happen a lot of times. This goes back to what I was saying in my opening about the 2 parts of our essential service infrastructure. We've got to invest, of course, in a stronger DOE, well-led, well-run. Check out the agency management dashboard we created in the controller's office. I will make sure our agencies are well-run, but also that they are partnering with folks like you so that we can turn more schools into community schools, have the after school that, again, is both childcare and the magic that helps our kids become the future leaders that they can be.
Thank you all so much. And now here's Greg Moore. I know we're late, but he's going to have some closing remarks, so thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody. Give yourselves a round of applause. Give our candidates a round of applause. Give Katie a round of applause. Give the folks online a round of applause. There were a lot of questions we didn't have time to get to. My name is Greg Morris. I run the New York City Employment and Training Coalition. It is Workforce Week in NYC. Shout out to everybody who's been part of Workforce Week. We have covered many of the topics that were covered here today together, everything from good jobs and union jobs and education pathways and green opportunities. But at the end of the day, it's all about wages and the ability to live in New York City. Thank you, each of you. Thank you for digging into that particular conversation. Interesting to note, and we don't have time to cover it now, but the number one question up on the very top, because I think it's on everybody's mind, and again, we won't cover it now. This is for follow-up for later. Ultimately, being mayor is a huge management job. What's your approach to management? Would you make any changes to the structures of city government? Something to think about as time goes forward. By the way, all week long, we've talked about good jobs, job pathways. Thank you, by the way, to our co-sponsor in this conversation, Michelle Jackson, the Human Services Council, all of our wonderful sponsors. I just want to note, it's been said, I think, that mayor of New York City is the second most important job in the country, and I suspect, given what we're all expecting in January, it's going to be the most important job in the country. So we wish you nothing but success on the trail now and into the future. And at the end of the day, let's remember, workforce development, the human services sector, it is the backbone of this city. It ensures our economic growth and mobility, and economic development lasts over time. It's the thing that's going to keep us on track for the future. That's the workforce agenda for 2025. And I just will say we expect to work on you together to ensure that all of what you talked about today is possible for all New Yorkers. Thank you once again. And thank you all for being here. Happy Workforce Week, everybody.